Saturday mornings in the 70s and 80s meant one thing if you were a kid, getting up early to watch telly. You'd wake around 8:30 or 9, head downstairs in your pajamas, and plant yourself in front of the box with a bowl of cereal. The choice was simple. Over on ITV, there was Tiswas, which was basically controlled chaos. Chris Tarrant and Sally James would throw custard pies, kids would get shoved into the cage and drenched with buckets of water, and the whole thing felt like it could derail at any moment. The BBC fired back with Multicoloured Swap Shop, a bit more wholesome but still 3 hours long. Noel Edmonds and Keith Chegwin hosted this marathon of phone-ins, toy swapping, cartoons and pop videos. They'd chat to viewers live on air, which felt genuinely thrilling because anything could happen. Both shows filled your entire morning, and you'd watch the lot because there wasn't anything else on. If you missed it, tough luck, wait until next Saturday. No catch-up, no recording, unless your family owned a video recorder, which most didn't. It was appointment viewing in its purest form. Every Saturday morning you'd clutch your pocket money and head to the corner shop, where the real work began. The big glass jars lined the shelves behind the counter, flying saucers in their pastel colours, blackjacks wrapped dark, sherbet dips with licorice straws poking through. Your threepence or sixpence had to stretch as far as possible, so you stood there weighing up your options like a tiny accountant. 4 blackjacks for a penny or 2 ounces of something else. Gobstoppers lasted ages if you didn't crunch them, changing colour as you sucked. But flying saucers gave you that instant fizz when the rice paper dissolved on your tongue. Some kids went for sherbet dips. The tangy powder sucked through licorice, while others grabbed fruit salads, those chewy rectangles that stuck to your teeth. The shopkeeper waited patiently behind the counter, used to this ritual. You'd finally make your choice, hand over your coins, and watch as they scooped your haul into a paper bag. Then you were off, comparing selections with your mates, already planning next week's strategy. Every penny had to count. Getting the most sweets for your money was serious business. This one goes by a lot of different names depending on where you grew up. In parts of England, it was knock down ginger or knock a door run. In Scotland, they called it chappie. Americans know it as ding dong ditch, and Canadians have nicky nicky 9 doors. The game itself is dead simple. You walk up to someone's front door, knock loudly or ring the bell, then sprint away before they can answer. The whole point is to hide somewhere nearby and watch the confused person open their door to nobody. It dates back to at least the 1800s in England, possibly earlier from a Cornish tradition called Nicken and Night. Kids all over the world played some version of this. The thrill came from that burst of adrenaline when you were running away, trying not to laugh, hoping you wouldn't get caught. If you were unlucky enough to be slow or trip, the angry homeowner might grab you and march you home to your parents. The real danger came from people who took the prank too seriously and responded with violence. Every Sunday evening around 5 o'clock, you'd find yourself hovering by the stereo with your fingers poised over the buttons. Recording the top 40 from Radio 1 wasn't a simple one-button job. You needed both record and play pressed down together, while also being ready to hit pause the instant a song finished. The chart countdown ran for 2 hours, and in that time you had to stay alert, because the DJs would rabbit over the intros and fade-outs without mercy. You'd be sitting there with your blank C90 loaded, trying to capture just the music and cut out all the chat. Missing that pause button meant you'd capture the DJ saying something like hit trick instead of hat trick, or announcing next week's climbers while your favourite song was still playing. Press too early and you'd lose the ending, wait too long and you'd get unwanted chat. An estimated 4 million people did this every Sunday in the 80s. The British phonographic industry ran campaigns calling it illegal, complete with skull and crossbones logos. That didn't stop anyone. You wanted those songs on tape, and this was how you got them. Your BMX bike was everything in the 1980s. Having one meant you were part of something the adults didn't quite understand. The actual riding started simple enough. You'd roll out after tea when the summer heat finally broke, meet your mates at the end of the street, and someone would suggest hitting the jumps. These weren't proper ramps at first, just whatever you could scavenge from building sites or nick from your dad's garage. A couple of planks balanced on some bricks made a launch ramp. If you were lucky, someone's older brother knew how to build a proper quarter pipe with plywood sheets. You'd spend hours getting the angle right, hammering away whilst your mum shouted about the noise. The tricks themselves were brutal to learn. A tail whip meant you had to kick the entire frame round beneath you whilst airborne. Landing wrong could put you straight on your arse or worse. Cross-ups and bar spins came easier, just twisting the handlebars mid-jump. Every scrape and bruise was worth it though, because riding meant freedom. You could go anywhere, jump anything, and nobody could tell you otherwise. The opening notes of Grange Hill would blast out the TV around 5:30, and if you were a kid in Britain during the 1990s, you dropped everything. The theme tune was this twangy bouncing thing that sounded like someone plucking a spring, playing over comic book style credits. The show was set in a comprehensive somewhere in North London, and it was unlike anything else on children's telly because the kids sounded like actual kids and the school looked exactly like yours, all concrete corridors and shabby classrooms. Before Grange Hill, school dramas were full of posh voices and jolly hockey sticks. But this one showed everything: the bullying, the terrible dinners, the teachers who were sometimes brilliant and sometimes useless. It tackled serious stuff that genuinely shocked people. Zammo Maguire's heroin addiction ran over 2 series, showing him gradually falling apart, his skin turning grey, his eyes heavy, looking like a boy hollowed out from the inside. There was racism, teenage pregnancy, pupil-teacher relationships gone wrong. You'd watch Gripper Stabson demanding money with menaces, or Roland Browning getting tormented for being overweight. It made you simultaneously terrified of secondary school and desperate to get there. The drama seemed impossibly exciting compared to boring primary school. Panini started making football sticker albums in the early 1970s, and by the 1990s, 9 out of every 10 British schoolkids were collecting them. The premise was simple. You bought packs of 5 or 6 stickers for pocket change and stuck them in an album, trying to fill every space. The stickers were random though, so you'd end up with 10 copies of some midfielder from Tunisia whilst desperately searching for Kenny Dalglish. That's where the playground economy kicked in. Kids gathered in corners, flipping through their swaps, calling out numbers. Got, need, got. Different stickers had different values depending on rarity. A shiny team badge cost you 5 regular players. A popular striker could go for 10. Some kids worked out the mathematics, calculating odds like tiny statisticians. If you needed 50 stickers left, your chances of pulling one you needed were slim. Schools banned them in many places because they caused fights. The rule was simple: be home when the streetlights came on. That was it. No phones, no tracking apps, no checking in every hour. You finished your tea, asked if you could go out, and off you went. The neighborhood became completely yours. You knocked on doors to see who was around, gathered whoever showed up, and invented the day as it happened. Games of hide and seek sprawled across multiple gardens, kids crouching behind wheelie bins and under porches whilst someone counted to 50. You rode bikes down streets you'd never explored before, built dens in patches of woods that probably weren't technically yours to use, played football in car parks with jackets for goalposts. Parents didn't supervise, didn't even know exactly where you were half the time. You just roamed. The streetlights were your clock, that orange glow flickering on one by one as dusk turned to proper dark. When they lit up, you knew it was time to head back. You'd cycle home, grass-stained and probably bleeding from somewhere, ready to do it all again tomorrow. The ZX Spectrum loaded games from cassette tape, which meant pressing play and then waiting 5 minutes if you were lucky, sometimes 20 for the bigger games. The computer made this hideous screeching noise that sounded like a fax machine being strangled, while the screen border flashed in hypnotic stripes of cyan, magenta and yellow. You'd sit there cross-legged staring at those colours, praying the screaming wouldn't stop, because if it stopped, if you got that awful silence followed by R-tape loading error 01, that was tragedy. You had to rewind and start again. The volume needed to be just right, too loud or too quiet, and the computer couldn't hear the data properly. Parents were banned from vacuuming or talking, and there was a myth that switching on a light could corrupt the load. Probably not true, but we enforced absolute silence anyway. If the tape had been played too many times, the magnetic coating would wear thin, and you'd get more and more errors until the game became unplayable. Turkey Twizzlers arrived on your tray like little corkscrews of pure happiness. They were processed beyond recognition, barely turkey at all really, but you didn't care one bit. That spiral shape made them fun to eat, and the crispy coating snapped when you bit down. Inside was something warm and salty that tasted vaguely of meat and somehow of childhood itself. You'd pile them next to a mountain of chips and a puddle of beans, creating the perfect beige plate. Some dinner ladies would give you an extra one if you caught them in a good mood. The whole dinner hall smelled of fried things and possibility. These meals were simple, filling, and exactly what you wanted after a long morning of maths and spelling tests. Nobody talked about nutrition or processed food back then. You just ate, traded the crispy bits, and felt genuinely happy. But in that moment, with ketchup on your chin and your mates beside you, Turkey Twizzlers were brilliant. Leg warmers started in dance studios where they kept muscles warm, but by the early 1990s they'd escaped into everyday life. The movie Fame came out in 1990, and suddenly everyone wanted to look like a dancer, whether they could actually dance or not. Jane Fonda's workout videos pushed this further. She wore bright leotards, tights, and those thick knitted tubes pulled up to the knee. These things were basically footless socks made from wool or cotton, scrunched down over your calves or stretched up your thighs depending on your mood. You'd see teenage girls wearing them to school over their jeans in bunched up layers, paired with oversized sweatshirts sliding off one shoulder. The colors weren't always neon pink or electric blue like people remember. Plenty came in black, grey, purple, or striped rainbow patterns. Some versions had stirrups at the bottom to keep them anchored during exercise, though most kids wearing them never stepped foot in an aerobics class. You could buy shorter ankle warmers too if the full-length style felt like too much. The point was looking athletic and energetic, broadcasting that you were part of the fitness craze even if your main exercise was walking around the shopping centre. Garbage Pail Kids launched in 1985 as a deliberate parody of those cutesy Cabbage Patch Kids dolls everyone was mad for. Instead of adorable babies, though, these sticker cards showed children with horrible deformities, suffering gruesome deaths, or covered in bodily fluids and filth. Each character had a punny name like Adam Bomb, who's pressing a detonator button whilst his head explodes into a mushroom cloud. You'd buy packs each, getting 5 random cards plus a stick of pink bubblegum. The cards came in pairs too, labelled A and B with the same illustration but different character names, so you had twice as many to hunt down. Trading them at school became an absolute obsession. Playgrounds turned into makeshift markets. Everyone swapping duplicates to complete their sets. Naturally, teachers despised the distraction. That ban was the best marketing Tops could have asked for. The forbidden status sent demand soaring, and with some places limiting how many packs each customer could buy just to avoid selling out instantly. You'd rush home from school, drop your bag in the hallway, and sprint to the telly to catch He-Man or Transformers. These shows dominated afternoon programming in the 80s, and kids were absolutely captivated by them. He-Man debuted in 1983, with Prince Adam holding up his sword and bellowing, "I have the power," before transforming into a muscle-bound warrior defending Castle Grayskull. Transformers offered giant robots disguising themselves as everyday vehicles, locked in endless battles between Autobots and Decepticons. What most kids didn't realize was that these cartoons were essentially half-hour toy commercials. Reagan-era deregulation had removed restrictions preventing shows from being created purely to sell merchandise. He-Man was the first cartoon conceived entirely to shift action figures off shop shelves, with Mattel producing the toys before the animated series even existed. The animation was often choppy and the plot simple, but none of that mattered when you were watching Skeletor scheme or Megatron transform. Kids memorized every character and pestered their parents for the latest figure. The shows taught you to think in terms of expanding rosters and collecting complete sets. It was captivating telly that happened to be brilliant marketing. Action figures were the holy grail of 80s toys. He-Man, Action Force, Star Wars characters and Transformers dominated every birthday and Christmas wish list, and you'd spend months dropping hints about which specific figure you desperately needed. The 3.75-inch scale that Star Wars kicked off in 1977 meant you could build entire armies without bankrupting your parents, though that never stopped you trying. What made these toys brilliant wasn't the plastic but the worlds they unlocked in your head. Each figure came with backstory, whether it was a file card on Action Force packaging explaining a character's speciality and rank, a mini-comic with He-Man detailing Eternia's latest crisis, or the transformation sequence that gave each Transformer its personality. You'd sprawl out on your bedroom floor for hours staging elaborate battles. Skeletor's forces would assault Castle Grayskull, whilst Optimus Prime rolled in as backup, a crossover that made perfect sense at the time. The sofa became a mountain range, the carpet turned into desert terrain, the gap behind the radiator was a deadly canyon. Your figures mixed across universes without a second thought. Going to the video rental shop on a Friday night was one of the genuine highlights of the week if you were a kid in the 80s or 90s. You'd pile into the car with your parents, already negotiating what to watch. The shop smelled like carpet and plastic VHS cases and stale popcorn. The children's section was usually tucked in a corner somewhere, maybe 2 or 3 shelves compared to the endless adult rows. You'd browse the same titles week after week, picking up those chunky cases to read the blurbs on the back. The cover art was everything. Bright colors, cartoon characters, promises of adventure. Renting cost £1 or £2 for overnight. Once you got that tape home, you watched it obsessively, twice on Saturday and once more Sunday morning before returning it. Some kids watched the same rented film 5 or 6 times in a single weekend because they didn't know when they'd see it again. Buying tapes wasn't realistic since a single VHS could cost 40 quid. Then you'd rewind it, drive back, and start thinking about next week's rental.